Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we are diving deep into a really specific but super important path to Australian permanent residency, the age-dependent relative visa, which you might know as Subclass 114. We're going to use official government info to map out this whole journey, step by step. So let's get right into it. So let's start with a question that probably hits close to home for a lot of you. You're thinking about an older family member and you want to be there for them, to care for them. And bringing them to live with you here in Australia just seems like the most natural, best solution. If that's where you're at, then you are in exactly the right place. So what exactly is this visa? Well, it's designed for a pretty unique situation. You got to listen to these keywords: single, older, and, this is the big one, financially dependent on a relative who's already living in Australia. This visa is all about creating a permanent home for relatives who genuinely need their Australian family support to get by. Okay, before we get buried in paperwork and all the rules, let's fast forward a bit. Let's talk about the prize, right? The destination. What does life in Australia actually look like for your relative once this visa is granted? What does it unlock for them? And wow, the benefits are pretty huge. We're not talking about some temporary passport here. This is the whole shebang. It's a permanent visa. That means your relative can stay in Australia forever. They can work, they can study, they can get on Medicare. It even opens doors for them to sponsor other relatives down the line, and, if they want to, eventually apply for Australian citizenship. Now, you heard me mention citizenship, but let's be super clear about the difference between being a permanent resident and a full-blown citizen, because this is important. A permanent resident can live here for good, no problem, but travel is where it gets different. The visa comes with a 5-year travel facility. That means for the first 5 years, they can come and go. After that, they'll need a special visa called a resident return visa to get back in. A citizen, though, they just grab their Australian passport and go. So the key takeaway is you really need to plan ahead for that 5-year mark. All right, so you know what you're aiming for. Now, how in the world do you get there? Let's get into the nitty-gritty, the step-by-step guide to the application journey itself. Okay, stop everything. Before we talk about a single form, you need to burn this rule into your brain. This is a non-negotiable, can't get around it rule. Your relative must be outside of Australia when you apply, and they must still be outside of Australia when the government makes its final decision. There are no exceptions here. All right, let's talk money. Of course, there's a cost. The starting price tag is Aussie 5,280. But I gotta stress that word, starting. That's the base fee. If you're including other family members on the application, that cost will go up. And that's not even counting other things you'll have to pay for, like health checks or police certificates. Now, the good news is you don't have to write one massive check right at the start. They've actually broken it up into 2 payments, which is kind of helpful. You pay the first chunk when you send in the application. Then you wait. The second and usually bigger payment only comes due way later in the process, and only after the Department of Home Affairs tells you it's time to pay. So you might be thinking, what about my relatives' kids? Well, there's a rule for that. You could include their dependent children or stepchildren in the application. You can add them right from the get-go or even later on, as long as a decision hasn't been made yet. Just remember, every single person on that application, no matter their age, has to pass Australia's health and character checks. Okay, let's take a deep breath. We're about to get into what is, for a lot of people, the toughest part of this whole thing. We need to have a really honest, frank look at the processing times. I'm just going to say it straight. This is not a fast visa. Not even close. The wait is significant. And it is so important that you and your whole family have realistic expectations about this right from day one. So why? Why does it take so long? Well, this quote from the Department of Home Affairs really says it all. It's basic supply and demand. Every year, way more people apply for these family visas than the government has spots for. It's that simple. And that creates a huge backlog. And the government has a system for this with official names, capping and queuing. Think of it like this. The government puts a cap on how many people can get one of these visas each year. It's a set number. And everyone who applies gets put in a queue, basically a line. They just process applications in order as those few spots open up. And that's why the wait can be years and years. So you can't control the queue, right? That's out of your hands. But what you can control is your own application. And trust me, you do not want to make simple mistakes that add even more time to the wait. This is where you have to be so careful. Fill out the forms perfectly. Double check. triple check that you've included every single document they ask for, and for goodness sake, pay the correct fee. Any of these mistakes can get your application sent back, and that's a delay you can't afford. Okay, let's imagine we fast-forwarded through that long, long wait. You get the email. The visa has been granted. So what happens next? Let's look at the final chapter, arrival, and what life in Australia is all about. First thing to know, don't go looking for a sticker in the passport. Those days are long gone. Australian visas are all digital now. The visa is just electronically linked to your relative's passport. It actually makes travel much easier. So here's a quick roadmap of what your relative's first 5 years will look like. It's really important to keep these dates in mind. Once the visa is granted, the clock starts. They have to make their first entry into Australia within about 12 months to activate it. Then that 5-year travel clock we talked about begins ticking. And after year 5, you're at a crossroads. Either apply for a resident return visa to keep traveling, or maybe start looking into becoming a citizen. So, there you have it. We've walked through the amazing benefits, the nitty-gritty of the application, and the very real, very long waiting game. We've basically mapped out the entire journey. Now, the final question, that one's for you to answer. After hearing everything, is this journey the right one for your family?